Disclaimer: this video is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The content explores the history and cultural context of offensive magic practices as documented in global traditions, ancient texts, and modern occult writings. It is not intended to encourage, promote, or glorify the use of harmful rituals, curses, or supernatural practices in any form. We do not endorse or practice the acts described in this video, and we urge viewers to approach this content with a critical and respectful mindset. Viewer discretion is advised. Across continents and centuries, people have believed that harming an object could harm a person. This idea is called sympathetic magic. Though often sensationalized in movies, the idea of using dolls in sympathetic magic has deep roots in West African spiritual practices. Among the Fon people, charm-based spellwork eventually evolved into the creation of grimoires, magical objects meant to influence outcomes. These traditions later blended with Catholicism and indigenous beliefs in Haitian and Louisiana voodoo. While most voodoo rituals are meant for healing, guidance, and honoring ancestors, some practitioners historically crafted dolls as vessels for baneful intent. The practice also parallels the Nkisi of the Congo, wooden figures driven with nails to activate a spirit's judgment. Traditionally, it was believed that to cast such a spell, the practitioner would create a small effigy of the target, often from cloth, corn husks, or wax, and embed items connected to the person: hair, nail clippings, scraps of clothing, or a name written on paper. The doll would then be symbolically harmed, pricked with pins, bound, or burned, while invocations were made to spirits or lows, voodoo deities, to empower the act. Each action on the doll was thought to affect the corresponding body part of the target. The ritual might include black candles, graveyard dust, ritual oils, or be performed at a crossroads to enhance its force. Because materials were accessible, the spell was considered relatively practical, but its real weight, believers said, came from the emotional charge and spirit contact behind it. Metaphysically, the doll was seen as a stand-in for the person, not merely symbolic, but magically linked through essence and intention. Some reported that pinning the doll released the victim's energy or called spirits to intervene on the caster's behalf. Anecdotal stories persist, such as one modern practitioner claiming their mother wrote a name on paper, skewered it with a needle, and burned it, after which the target allegedly died by suicide. Whether this is coincidence or belief-driven folklore, such stories continue to fuel the mystique around doll magic. It's important to note, however, that voodoo as a tradition is not inherently malevolent, and these curses represent only one facet of a much larger, deeply spiritual system. Again, this is not a guide or endorsement, just a look into historical and cultural beliefs surrounding magic. In classical antiquity, curse tablets, known as boikalin in Greek and deifixiones in Latin, were believed to be potent forms of baneful magic. These objects served as written appeals to the gods or spirits of the dead, asking them to bind, silence, or punish an enemy. Typically made of thin sheets of lead or papyrus, the tablets were inscribed with the target's name and a written curse. The text often called on underworld deities, such as Hecate, Persephone, or Pluto, to act on the spellcaster's behalf. In some cases, the writing might say something like, "Bind the tongue of name, so he cannot speak in court." These curses were invoked against rivals in love, opponents in legal trials, competitors in sports, or even thieves. Thousands of such tablets have been excavated across the Greco-Roman world, particularly in Greece and Egypt, showing how widespread and normalized these practices once were. Scholars also note that the inscriptions sometimes included mysterious syllables called voces mysticae, believed to be magical words of power. Traditionally, it was believed that to cast such a spell, the practitioner would inscribe the curse on a sheet of lead, sometimes rolling it around a nail, folding it, or inserting it into a small figure or container. The spell might then be placed in a grave, buried in the earth, dropped into a sacred spring, or nailed to a temple wall, locations thought to connect the spell to the spirit world. During this process, the caster would often recite an incantation while physically damaging or sealing the tablet, symbolically binding the victim through spiritual means. These rituals varied in complexity. Some were simple, requiring only a name and intent. Others demanded exact timing, invocation formulas, or offerings. Importantly, these rituals were believed to work because of the perceived link between the written word and supernatural enforcement, not because of any direct action by the caster. The core concept behind these curses was binding magic. The tablet acted as a formal request to underworld gods to restrain or torment the target. A typical phrase might ask that the victim be held like a bird in a cage, or rendered powerless until justice is done. Categories of curses included diakapai, which were separation spells meant to break up couples or friendships, and agagai, designed to manipulate emotions, often in love or loyalty. Erotic variants even requested that rivals become undesirable or impotent. Far from being seen as evil, these spells were often considered a form of folk justice, a way for ordinary people to level the playing field against more powerful enemies. While modern viewers may regard these rituals as symbolic or psychological, to ancient practitioners, they were deeply real. The idea that a simple lead tablet could kill or ruin someone was not metaphor, it was cultural truth. This segment is intended solely for educational purposes. These practices reflect ancient belief systems and should not be interpreted as spiritual advice or endorsed actions. In African American hoodoo, Southern folk magic, the crossing spell, or hot foot, is a classic offensive curse. It dates back to West African foot-track magic. Traditionally, it was believed that a practitioner would lay out a pattern of cursed powder on the victim's path, such as an X, wavy lines, or even blood, and spit into it while uttering a curse. Common ingredients included salt, chili pepper, graveyard dirt, or gopher dust. When the victim stepped into this crossing, they were believed to be spiritually poisoned through the feet. This form of foot-track magic was considered one of the simplest yet oldest hoodoo hexes. As one root worker described it, anyone crossing this mark with ill intentions would receive the harm back tenfold. Traditionally, it was believed that to perform a crossing, practitioners would wait until the intended target had passed, and then quickly draw the marks on the ground or sprinkle the powder on their doorstep. No elaborate ceremony was needed, but some accounts mention muttering the victim's name or spitting a curse during the act. The classic method involved placing crossing powder, often containing salt, sulfur, ash, or pepper, in an X shape on the street or floor. In some cases, a small mirror or personal item would be buried beneath it. The curse was said to be activated by spitting into the mark or calling on spirits with phrases such as, "All the evil I lay, let them step in and get it." The materials were easily accessible, and the method low-tech, which made it highly practical for someone with access to the victim's route. The magical effect was thought to arise from a sympathetic foot connection. Since the person physically stepped on the powder, they were believed to symbolically walk into the curse. The spell was said to bend a person's luck to the caster's will. Some hoodoo authors and practitioners described it as one of the most powerful ways to make someone bend over, become submissive, or suffer a string of misfortunes. Anecdotal reports describe victims experiencing sudden illness or minor accidents shortly after stepping across the mark. Unlike many secretive occult rites, this spell was often obvious. The lines or crosses were drawn in plain sight, functioning as a spiritual trap. As a result, it was considered both highly potent and widely feared. Again, this is not a guide or endorsement, just a look into historical and cultural beliefs surrounding offensive magic. If you enjoy this type of content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can unsubscribe later. In the traditional belief systems of the Congo people of Central Africa, Nkisi is a sacred object believed to house a spiritual force capable of action, often justice or vengeance. These wooden figures, sometimes shaped like kneeling or standing humans, were used by ritual specialists known as Nganga to mediate between the physical and spirit worlds. Nkisi was often embedded with a mirror or pouch on its belly, filled with spiritually potent substances, and covered with nails or sharp blades driven into its body. Far from being simple curses, these objects functioned as instruments of community justice. When someone was accused of wrongdoing, the Nganga would call upon the Nkisi to invoke spiritual intervention. Traditionally, it was believed that the ritual began with the Nganga preparing the figure by inserting sacred herbs, graveyard dirt, or other spiritually charged substances into a cavity or pouch in the statue. To activate the Nkisi against the specific individual, the Nganga would speak the name of the accused aloud and hammer a nail or blade into the figure, each strike believed to amplify the power of the spirit within. Sometimes personal items like hair, cloth, or even a written name were added to bind the figure to the intended person. The act was usually done in a ritual setting, often accompanied by chants, kanda, or invocations. Once activated, it was believed that the Nkisi spirit would act on behalf of the community, delivering justice through illness, confession, or even paralysis. While crafting Nkisi required skilled ritual knowledge, using it to nail someone was considered a focused, symbolic act of enforcement. From a cultural perspective, the Nkisi was not merely a tool of harm, but a moral enforcer. Anthropologists note that in Congo cosmology, all harm has a spiritual cause. So punishing wrongdoing through Nkisi was viewed as righteous correction, not witchcraft. Belgian colonial records describe widespread fear and respect for these figures, which colonial governments often confiscated or destroyed. Some officials even reported physical symptoms after seizing or desecrating Nkisi. Today, Nkisi figures are housed in museums, galleries, and sacred spaces, and continue to be studied by scholars of African religion and art. While some are now sold as tourist items, many communities still regard them as powerful cultural artifacts, reminders of a worldview in which justice, spirit, and community were deeply intertwined. In Japanese folklore, the Ushinoki Mairi is a dramatic 7-night curse ritual. The curser, traditionally a scorned woman, dresses in white with disheveled hair and wears a special tripod crown bearing 3 lit candles. At the hour of the ox, around 1 to 3 a.m., she visits a Shinto shrine and nails a straw effigy of her victim to a sacred tree. According to legend, after repeating this ritual 7 nights in a row, the victim will suddenly fall ill and die. Notably, the ritual is said to fail if anyone sees the curser in the act. This curse is famously associated with Kyoto's Kipponi Shrine and appears in woodblock art, for example hokusai, and literature. Though partly mythical, its detailed procedure marks it as a formalized curse in Japanese magic. Traditionally, it was believed that to perform such a ritual, each night, the curser must don a white kimono and wear an inverted pot on her head with 3 burning candles, forming a crown. She carries a hammer and sticks nails into the effigy at the tree. Focusing on body parts as wished, a nail in the stomach might cause stomach pain, for example. A mirror is worn hidden on her chest to conceal her identity. The shrine tree, Shinboku, serves as the portal to divine power. The materials, straw doll, nails, candles, are simple, but the difficulty is in the timing, secrecy, and spiritual discipline. Fasting, chanting Shinto prayers, the curser must complete the act each of 7 nights without fail. Conceptually, the curse binds the victim's fate to the ritual. The nails through the effigy are said to inflict corresponding wounds or sickness on the person. Some stories say deities or vengeful spirits are invoked. The triple candles may symbolize Hachishikuzuma or other yokai. Essentially, it's an endurance spell. Persistence for a week gradually mounts supernatural pressure on the target. The longer the ritual is observed, the more power accumulates. Folklore and horror stories claim victims caught by this curse experience inexplicable ailments at midnight, exactly a week after the final nail. In metaphoric terms, it exploits Shinto notions of impurity and ritual space by consecrating the tree with pain, the witch transfers death energy. Its notoriety makes it one of the most fearsome curses in Asian occult lore, despite its origins in folktale. A witch's bottle is a well-documented object in folk magic traditions, particularly in Britain and colonial America, used to ward off or reflect back harmful spells. Though often categorized as a protective charm today, its original use had a distinctly offensive component. It was meant to trap and punish the source of a curse. Historical records from the 17th to 19th centuries describe bottles filled with bodily traces such as urine or nail clippings, along with sharp objects like bent pins or thorns. These were then sealed and buried, often beneath the hearth, doorway, or at a crossroads. The belief was that any malevolent force directed at the victim would be drawn into the bottle and neutralized, or returned to the sender with pain. Traditionally, it was believed that to activate such a bottle, the practitioner would collect personal items from the afflicted person, especially something with strong bodily essence like urine, and place them in the bottle along with iron nails, pins, or shards. These were meant to confuse or stab the curse symbolically. Some accounts mention heating the sealed bottle in fire to cook the evil inside, while reciting specific prayers or incantations. The materials were typically ordinary household objects, making the spell accessible to cunning folk and lay practitioners alike. However, the belief emphasized precision. Without a real connection to the curse or its caster, the spell was said to lose power or misfire. One of the most frequently cited cases involves James Morrell, a famous 19th century cunning man from Essex, England. According to folklore, Morrell constructed a cast iron bottle to help a young woman suffering from what locals believed to be spiritual torment. He allegedly placed the bottle into a fire while chanting, and shortly afterward, the suspected source of the curse reportedly fell into agony, while the victim recovered. Whether literal or metaphorical, such stories show the dual nature of witch bottles. They were both defensive shields and spiritual weapons. While today they are often regarded as apotropaic objects, magical tools to ward off evil, their roots lie in the realm of active, retaliatory spellwork meant to strike back at those believed to have caused harm. Lay Ting talismans, known as thunder charms, are part of a long-standing tradition within Taoist ritual magic. These amulets, often inscribed on yellow paper or coin-shaped metal, were historically believed to invoke the divine authority of Lei Gong, the god of thunder. Used not only in exorcisms but occasionally for personal justice or retribution, they were designed to symbolically issue a heavenly decree against a target. One common phrase seen on these talismans is Ji Ji Ru Lu Ling, meaning with the speed of the law, effectively transforming the curse into a cosmic legal order. Although often used to expel negative spirits, some texts suggest they could also be directed toward specific individuals accused of wrongdoing or evil. Traditionally, it was believed that a Taoist practitioner would inscribe these talismans using cinnabar ink or, in rare cases, blood. The script was composed of Fu characters, sacred calligraphy representing divine commands, written while invoking celestial beings such as Laozi or the thunder deities. In some ritual versions, the name of the offender would be incorporated directly into the spell, and the talisman would be burned, floated on water, or buried. These acts symbolized releasing the talisman into the hands of heavenly forces. While this practice required some formal ritual training, the core act was symbolic, to request divine judgment, not personal vengeance. According to Taoist cosmology, Lei Ting talismans were treated not as tools of personal malice, but as mechanisms to restore balance. By invoking Lei Gong, the practitioner appealed to the enforcer of cosmic law, a celestial official tasked with punishing spiritual or moral offenses. It was believed that once the talisman was activated, supernatural entities would carry the message upward, initiating karmic consequences on behalf of heaven. Though historical records of direct outcomes are limited and often anecdotal, some believers recount modern stories of bad luck or illness befalling targets of such charms. In essence, the Lei Ting talisman represents one of the more formal and potent examples of baneful magic within Taoist ritual, viewed not as chaos magic, but as divine justice carried out through sacred law. In modern hoodoo traditions, a system rooted in African American folk spirituality, one of the more feared offensive rituals is the mirror box curse. This practice is based on the concept of spiritual reflection, where harm is believed to rebound onto its sender. The box is often lined with mirrors, symbolically surrounding the target with their own image. Traditionally, an effigy of the target, such as a doll or a carved black candle bearing their name, was placed inside the mirrored box, along with crossing materials like red pepper, sulfur, or graveyard dirt. During the ritual, the practitioner might recite a curse designed to return evil back to its source, saying something like, "All the foul words and evil you do will come back to you as these mirrors reflect your image back to you." According to Hoodoo belief, the creation of such a box required careful symbolic arrangement. It was thought that mirror shards or small tiles would be placed along all interior surfaces to ensure complete reflection. The figure representing the target, whether human-shaped or symbolic, was placed inside, surrounded by spiritually charged ingredients used in crossing spells. This would typically be followed by a spoken intention or curse, and finally, the box was sealed and buried, often in a graveyard. Burial was seen as a way of binding the spell to the spiritual realm, with graveyard spirits believed to aid in carrying out the curse. Although complex, the materials were commonly available in households or local shops. In Hoodoo lore, this spell functioned as a kind of spiritual mirror trap, capturing any harm directed outward by the target and bouncing it back. Rather than blocking attacks, the box was thought to intensify them, transforming passive defense into active retribution. Practitioners shared stories of aggressors finding themselves afflicted by the very misfortunes they tried to cause. Theoretically, this feedback loop would continue until the target stopped their actions or the box was removed. While difficult to verify in a scientific sense, within the framework of magical belief, this curse is seen as one of the most potent examples of mirror-based retributive magic in the Hoodoo tradition. The Witch's Ladder is a traditional European knot curse used by cunning folk. It consists of a length of cord knotted multiple times, often with feathers, thorns, or pins inserted. Folklorist Charles Leland and others recorded that such ladders, or garlands, were explicitly used in hexing rituals. In one 18th century British case, a hidden ladder of 9 knots tied to a bewitched woman's apron caused her fits and wasting illness until it was found and untied. Italian folklore likewise mentions the striga's garland, used for curses. Each knot symbolizes a malediction. The longer the cord and more knots, the stronger the binding. Traditionally, it was believed that to cast such a spell, the practitioner takes a cord, often black wool or hemp, and ties it into a series of knots, commonly 9. At each knot they might insert a symbolic item, for example a black hen feather, a thorn, or a sliver of bone, and recite a curse against the victim. An English source describes a 1.5 meter string knotted with chicken feathers as a typical witch's ladder. The cord is then hidden on or near the victim, under their bed, inside their clothing, or buried on their property, remaining until the curse finishes. Unless the knots are undone, the curse is believed to persist. Materials, cord, odds, and ends are easily obtained, and the operation can be done silently. However, the practitioner usually works alone and in secret due to the baneful intent. Legend holds that each knot gradually strangles the victim's vitality. Montague Summers reported that witches themselves said an untied ladder caused the target to pine and die. In effect, the victim's well-being is bound to the cord. As long as it remains knotted, the curses remain in force. The Otoa tribes mention that the ladder travels up the cord, a sympathetic metaphor, and when it reaches the final knot, the person might die. Folklore has it that finding and untying the knots releases the victim, as in the Island McGee case. Because the curse requires no spoken words once the ladder is laid, its power lies in the secrecy and tension of the cord. Among folk spells, the Witch's Ladder is considered extremely effective. As one collector wrote, it will work with far more baleful effects than spoken charms. The evil eye is a ubiquitous curse found in many cultures: Greek, Roman, Arabic, Jewish, South Asian, etc. It is not a single ritual but a belief. One person's jealous glare or malediction causes illness or misfortune in the target. Historical texts speak of the bad eye, fascination, that can beam poison through vision. For centuries, Mediterranean and Middle Eastern peoples have warned that even wishing envy aloud could send harmful rays. Names like Malukiu, Italian, or Ayin Hara, Hebrew, reflect this notion, and protective symbols like blue eye amulets and red string abound to ward it off. The evil eye is often seen as semi-conscious, in other words, it can be cast by mere jealousy. For example, Pliny the Elder reported that African magicians can even kill those on whom they fix their gaze, illustrating the lethal reputation given to this curse. Because it is usually cast by intent alone, there is no fixed ritual. Historically, some believed that merely glaring at someone while speaking their name or spitting on the ground could transmit the curse. In parts of rural Europe, a common folk method was to spit 3 times and say a phrase, like ci rimedu in Italian, after cursing someone. Some traditions assign gestures, pointed index finger, or the horn sign to cast the evil eye. Others recommend writing the victim's name on a piece of bread and treating it as cursed bread. The simplicity makes this curse extremely practical. No special tools are required beyond one's spite or envy. Timing can be any moment of anger or midnight vigil. The downside is unpredictability. It's often considered unconscious magic, but that belief itself underscores its feared effectiveness. Metaphysically, the evil eye is explained as emanating poisonous rays from the envious eye. Ancient Greeks and Romans thought the gaze itself could transmit illness or misfortune. In folk cosmology, a person casting the evil eye temporarily steals or damages the soul of the victim. Many cultures even consider it capable of causing sudden sickness or death. The omnipresence of talismans, like the Turkish Nazar Boncuo, shows the power attributed to it. Today, every unexplained bad luck might be blamed on the evil eye. As Pliny noted, the notion that a glance can kill was widely believed. While modern medicine dismisses it, the curse's widespread lore and protective charms testify to its enduring place in global magic as a potent, baneful force. The Neathung, or Old Norse curse pole, was an exceptionally feared Viking curse. Traditionally, one erected a wooden pole, often carved from hazel, topped with a horse's or cow's head and carved with runes, as a publicly announced curse against an enemy. The earliest record comes from Egil's saga, written around the 13th century, in which Egil Skallagrimsson plants a Neathung facing Norway to curse King Eirik Bloodaxe and Queen Gunhildr. He declares a dire hex in verse, then affixes the horse's head outward and carves the full curse onto the pole. In Norse society, setting up a Neathung officially labeled the target an outlaw, Neathungr, and called the land spirits to wander his fate until death or exile. The act was tantamount to a spiritual declaration of death or banishment. According to the saga, it describes a ritual involving animal sacrifice. Egil slaughtered a horse, raised the head atop the pole, and inscribed the curse in runes. He then planted the pole on a promontory for all to see. After performing this rite, the caster declared the witchcraft binding in verse and left. The nails in the head symbolized the curse's activation. While exact formulas have not survived beyond the sagas, the method was clearly elaborate and public. Anyone could witness the proclamation. Because of the cost and symbolism of the materials, it was likely reserved for extreme cases of vengeance. In modern Iceland, there have even been legal cases. In 2006 and 2016, farmers erected Neathung against individuals, causing police intervention. These contemporary echoes show it is still regarded as a potent, in some cases illegal, curse. Norse mythic belief held that the Neathung's power came from the animism of the horsehead and runic binding. The carved runes invoked the land spirits, Landvetter. Egil explicitly calls on them to make the cursed couple wander astray with no rest. Symbolically, turning the horse's life force away from the land and onto the enemies was thought to derail their luck and health. In practice, witnesses of a erected pole considered the victim condemned. The pole's existence signaled impending misfortune or death. Whereas other spells were secret, the Neathung was shouted aloud. Its social and magical effect was to entirely isolate and kill the enemy in the eyes of the community. This combination of blood sacrifice, public curse, and potent imagery made it arguably the strongest Norse baneful magic. The Curse of the Pharaohs is a legendary tomb curse from ancient Egypt. It's said that tombs, especially of kings, carry inscribed warnings and supernatural protection. Anyone who disturbs the burial will be struck down. The most famous example is Tutankhamun's tomb, opened 1922. Lord Carnarvon's death soon after the discovery sparked global media tales that he fell prey to the Pharaoh's Curse. Newspapers proclaimed that this mummy's curse brought untimely demise to tomb intruders. Indeed, the myth says the tomb's builders placed death spells, invoking gods like Anubis or Seth on the sarcophagi. While modern Egyptologists view the curse as sensationalism, in antiquity the idea was real. Hieroglyphic curses, for example, a swift demise to him who disturbs this tomb, have been found in some pyramids and coffins. Traditionally, it was believed that to activate such a ritual, from the outsider's perspective, is simple. Anyone who breaks the seal of the tomb is cursed, with no further action required. Egyptians themselves sometimes recited formulas when sealing a tomb, but by the time of Carter's dig the protective magic would have been dormant. Practically, the curse manifested as misfortune supposedly befalling robbers. In Tutankhamun's case, Carter noted a plaque warning any pernicious violator with swift wrath. Today, historians attribute such curses to coincidence or toxic tomb molds, though even mold seems unlikely. A 2002 medical study found that Carter's crew who entered the tomb lived no shorter lives than average. There was no significant association between entering the tomb and early death. Thus, the mechanism was more superstition than spell, but it captured the world's imagination as a paradigmatic mystical curse. Culturally, the Pharaoh's Curse symbolizes the ultimate divine retribution. In funerary religion, Egypt was rich in spells, from the Book of the Dead, meant to protect the dead. Some of these could be twisted into curses on the living. The legend proved enduring. Even now, many tourists wear amulets when visiting tombs, just in case. The curse's potency comes from its narrative power rather than a known formula. Nevertheless, for centuries tomb robbers operated in fear. Tales of accidents, collapsing tunnels, sudden plague, were often attributed to curses. In magical terms, breaking a royal tomb was equated with sacrilege. The Curse of the Pharaohs thus remains one of history's most famous baneful spells, reflecting the belief that sacred laws of death and the gods could be turned on sacrilegious intruders. While the Curse of the Pharaohs is one of the most famous examples of ancient magical belief, modern historians see it as myth, not fact. This video explores the cultural and historical roots of such legends, not their literal truth. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, consider liking and subscribing for more explorations into history, folklore, and cultural beliefs. Remember, this video was made for educational purposes. The practices shown are part of historical records, not endorsements. Stay curious, stay respectful, and keep learning.